What's the difference between a haunted house and a haunted home? Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome or welcome back to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. So today I have another review for you. This is a review of The Staircase in the Woods by Chuck Wendig. This is being published by Del Rey in the end of April 2025, and I was given a complimentary copy by the publisher in exchange for an honest review. And now, I haven't read a lot of Chuck Wendig. There are a lot of his books that I want to read. You know, his Wanderer series, Wanderer and Wayward, as well as his Miriam Black series. But I have read his two most recent horror novels, The Book of Accidents, as well as Black River Orchard, and I really enjoyed both those. So when I got a copy of this book, I was really excited, and it didn't let me down. What I've come to notice about Chuck Wendig's writing is that it has a lot of heart, right? And whatever supernatural trappings or metaphysical ideas that he uses in the story are all simply a structure upon which he can tell a story about humanity. And he even says so quite explicitly in the afterword of this story. He says that once he figured out the supernatural staircase in the woods situation and what's going to be at the top of the staircase and all these things, once he figured that out, then he got those details out of the way. That let him be free to actually tell the story he wanted to tell. And this is a story of not just childhood trauma, though that is a big part of it, but how that trauma is brought into our adulthood and how it affects our whole lives. The story focuses on 5 friends, though really 4 friends, because one of them disappeared as a child. So these are 5 misfits, right? These are 5 outcasts, and you can't help but think of the Losers Club. And Wendig definitely pays homage to King throughout this book. So the Losers Club being our gang of kids that we follow in the novel It. You can't help but think of that. And all 5 of these kids are broken in different ways, and broken not as a fault of their own, but because they come from really difficult, different childhood circumstances. So each of them has a home that is less than ideal, let's say, and the trauma they experience is different, right? So it's not the same thing over and over again, and yet somehow in their being outcasts and in their sense of longing for some sort of human connection, they find each other and they make a pact. And you know, with childhood friends like that, there is a thick and thin feeling, right? That ride or die no matter what, but there are always waves in a friend group. And you see that here, that it isn't, perfect sailing all the time. There is some tumult. Now, the story starts in the present, and these characters are all in their middle age, right? So they're in their mid 40s. You really see that they're at a point in their lives where they either should have achieved something, or the fact that they haven't achieved something is really taking a toll on them. And who they've become since high school is quite apparent. And, middle age is at a point where you're looking forward to see what is left in my life and who else can I become? Or is this who I am? You have to make that decision. So we start with our characters in the present day. There are a few flashbacks that go back to explain what happened in the past, but most of it is starting in the present day. So I think the characters are really great. We follow 2 main characters' point of view, Owen and Lore, though there are a group of 5, as I said. Owen, Lore, and then Hamish, Nikki, and Maddie. Maddie being the one who disappeared. So we don't see Maddie in the present. We only see him in the past in our flashbacks. And the story, quite simply, is when they were younger, they were out camping in the woods one weekend, getting away from their parents, getting away from the rest of their real life. And they found a random staircase in the middle of the woods that went to nowhere. And Maddie decided to go up it, and he disappeared. And that has plagued them their whole life. He was kind of the glue that held their friend group together. Right? So as adults, they've drifted apart. And even though they tried to stay together in some ways, they didn't have that cohesion that he had brought to their group. It was like a rock thrown in a still lake. The ripples of his disappearance just affected every aspect of their lives. And now as adults, they've come together again, and they found a new staircase in the woods, and they decide to go up it to try to find their friend. And the reason they go up the staircase now in the present is for different reasons. They don't all have the same motivations or the same ideas about what is going to happen. What I really like about these characters is that they feel genuine, they feel realized. One thing Wendig does is he writes his characters right on the edge of being stereotypes, because the characters are so different and they embody their differences. However, if you look at all their characteristics written down in a list on a page, you could say that they're a stereotype or an archetype. But when you look at them in situ, right? When you look at them interacting with the other characters and in the world he's created, they feel perfectly realized and genuine. They don't feel over the top. They feel like they fit in this world. So I think the character work is really good, especially because you look at them as when they're in high school and then as they develop into adults, and how their particular flavors of trauma, let's say, change who they become and how it affects them, and how this loss of a friend changes something in each of them, but in different ways. And so now that they are adults, their differences that they had as kids have become exacerbated and have kind of taken over their lives. And what's beautiful about these characters is that none of them are perfect. You know, they're not perfect either in their victimhood or their villainy. They're not perfect in their apathy or in their friendship, right? They're all messy characters, even the ones that you like more than the others. So I think the character work is really well done. And I think the internal journey, both the internal journey on the page once our story starts, but then the journey you get from childhood to adulthood and what is lost, right? The innocence that is lost, and also the hope that is often lost, the impulse, the connectivity that is lost, those are all really beautifully displayed. The atmosphere in this story, I think, is great. I think the world building is really beautifully done. You know, the first third of the story is them coming together. So you jump right in. And in that case, I think the pacing, especially at the beginning, works really well because you know they're going to go up this staircase. You know they're going to find something supernatural. Something is going on, right? I mean, their friend went up a staircase and disappeared, and then that staircase disappeared. Now this new staircase has appeared out of nowhere. So you know something supernatural is going on. So of course they're going to go up it, and shenanigans are going to happen. And so he jumps right in with the pacing to get deep into the characters' minds. So they don't go up the staircase until about 1/3 of the way through the book. But that first third is so full of doing character work, both giving you backstory, but also letting you know who they are and setting the mood, setting the vibe, and let you understand the tension that exists between these four individuals. I think it's really well crafted. And then, of course, once they go up the staircase, then the world building there is even more spectacular. Now, I'm not going to give away what's at the top of the staircase, but let's just say it is a place that obviously it's a supernatural situation, right? You can assume that. It is a place that feeds on pain and anger and suffering. It is a place that feeds on your own insecurities. And so, of course, once they get up there, all of their own insecurities, all of their own ideas of inferiority or their ideas of superiority, those all become exaggerated. And all of the things that were their rough edges that made it hard for them to stay together become bigger and more pronounced. And so they have to learn what it means to maintain a friendship so they can find their friend, hopefully, and do it in the face of even more unsurmountable odds than before. This really is a story about being haunted by your past, being haunted by your friendship, being haunted by the parts of yourself that you're afraid to change. These four characters, you know, often Wendig, there's a few places in the book where he refers to friendships and to family like a house, like a home. And he says that, you know, that home can fall into disrepair, but you have to do the work to build it up again. And that's what family or friendships are. And these characters are like ruins that have been left to rot, yet they're desperately trying to rebuild themselves, and they just don't know how to do it. They are reaching out into the darkness, trying to find the lumber to put themselves back together again, and there's a desperation there that is tangible in these people's lives. As I said, this is a story about a haunting, both a metaphysical haunting, but also a metaphorical haunting. The haunting of your heart, the haunting of what it means when that place of safety, right? That friendship that you've created, that covenant, that source of refuge from your family, from school, from everyday life. And that is the only thing that was holding you together. When that dissolves, what is left for you? That is what they're haunted by, the loss of that. And you know, myself entering middle age and knowing that these characters are more or less the same age as Chuck Wendig, the author, I think there's something about that the elder millennials / Gen X, like people that are right on that cusp of Gen X and elder millennials, so people that are entering into midlife right now in their mid-40s. There's something about an existential angst that I don't know if other generations have quite had, in part because the social events that define our life experiences are so widely different than other generations, and there isn't one unifying thing. You know, there isn't a world war to bind us together. There isn't even the Vietnam War or other conflicts where you can rage against something collectively. There are so many little fires, and yet the world has become more bifurcated in that time. And so there is this kind of existential ennui or angst that I think elder millennials definitely feel. And as they enter middle age, it's really hard to get a grasp on who you are. And the idea of adult friendship is a really scary thing. So if you've had friendships since childhood that you've been able to maintain, that feels like a gift. And so to have something so important during childhood that broke apart, and now to try to find it again, to see if that reconciliation is possible, is a terrifying aspect. And that saturates this whole story, right? That feeling of angst, that feeling of almost existential despair that comes with entering middle age and still not knowing who you are or how you are or what it means to be looking at your future and knowing that you've peaked, possibly. The story itself, I think, works really well. I think it is really a character study about these primarily these 4 characters. There are 5, like I said, but you don't get to really do a lot of study of Maddie. You only learn about him in flashbacks. So it is this character study of these 4 characters. All the supernatural trappings are used to affect that end. And so with that in mind, I think the plotting, for the most part, works really well. Like I said, you take about a third of the book before you actually get up to the top of the staircase. And in that time, you build the world as well as you build up the characters, and you learn how they relate to one another and how they used to relate to one another. So I think that is really well done. And then when you get to the top of the staircase, again, I don't want to give away what is there, but then it's a matter of both trying to find their friend, but also trying to find a way for themselves to escape. And very similar to the Losers Club, there are forces beyond their control that are trying to split them apart. And the only way that they can actually escape and find their friend is to come together, to renew their friendship, to renew this idea of a covenant, of a promise that you make to yourself and to one another. Now, the way he has the particular supernatural situation that he's placed them in gives him a lot of leeway to give you a lot of morbid imagery again and again and again. And some of that is really fun. I will say that I enjoy the pacing overall. I think that the time they spent in the top of the staircase, it works. And there is a sense of lost time, though, right? So they're up there, and they feel like they're up there for months, you know, and there are different ways that they're able to survive for months. They find food, they find different things. So they're up there with the sense of being there for months, and they lose track of time. And I think there's a little bit of rambling, a little bit of overwriting in that last 2/3. And I don't know what I would cut because I like all the little pieces of it. And maybe it's intentional because it does evoke in the reader a similar sense of like temporal vertigo in the same way that the characters have it. So maybe that is intentional. It doesn't ever drag. It doesn't ever feel too slow, but you often just feel like you're spinning your wheels. And yet the characters are spinning their wheels. So this could be very intentional. I'm not saying that as a real critique. I'm just saying that that is my observation. And you have to go into it knowing that Wendig is really putting you in an emotional place that is very similar to the characters, and that may not be an emotional place that you want to be in, or it just may not be a storytelling technique that you appreciate. The plotting in general, I think, is good. I think that he doesn't jump us up to the top of the staircase too quickly. He gives us time to learn about these characters. You know, as adults, they've all gone their separate ways. So you learn about them individually, then they come together, and then they go on this journey. And then once they get to the top of the staircase, they have to break apart again. So they separate, and then they come together again. So you have this constant, almost like this beating of a heart, going out and coming in, going out and coming in. And because of that, you see different aspects of these characters. I think it's really effectively done. And once you get to the top of the staircase and they face these obstacles, you know, as they're searching for their friend and trying to find their own safety at the same time, they have to ask, are those two separate things? You know, finding that friendship that we lost, both the friendship as in the person, but that intangible quality of friendship that we lost, finding that and finding our own way out of this place. Are those the same thing or are those separate things? And could we do both of those things? That's an important question he's asking. You know, can friendship save you, or do you have to take care of yourself first? So that's what I have to say about the plotting. I think that it is effective and it works. It might feel a little bit repetitive in the back half for some people. I did not mind it. I like his writing style. I think his writing is emotional. His writing is descriptive, and he intersperses it with these little pithy ideas that work really well. And you have these characters that are examining their lives, so it makes sense that you have these little aphorisms, these little just little nuggets of wisdom, or what appears to be wisdom. It could be, you know, the opposite. You never know. But those are interspersed through the writing, and I think it works really well. I think the writing is generally pretty tight. Now, he does have a tendency to ramble a little bit in that back half, but, you know, it doesn't feel accidental. So I appreciated the writing for what it was. I think his writing is really emotional, and since it's emotionally driven and it cares about the characters more than anything else, I think that it works. You know, one of the things he says in his afterword, which for me is kind of a key to unlocking the whole story. It doesn't give anything away about the plot. It gives away about his thinking process. And I almost wish it was in a foreword. However, if it was, I wouldn't have read it because I've gotten into the habit of not reading authors' forewords before books until after I read them. So I guess it doesn't matter. But he says in his afterword, "We are creatures of extraordinary depth, a deep cavern with infinite strata, and we have seen things and felt things and experienced things. We're reckoning with a wealth of love and trauma and pain and wonder. And storytelling, at its best, represents that reckoning on the page." That's what he is doing with this book. He is reckoning with all of these contradictory ideas that make up the human experience. And he's doing it in a way that is heartfelt, that is morbid, that is occasionally bloody and gruesome. a way that is honest, right? That is what is important about this book. He uses this supernatural device of a magical staircase in the woods to tell a story about what it means to be human, to tell a story that is stripped bare of everyday life, so you can see the intimate inner workings of humanity as found in these 4/5 outcasts, these people that are already on the fringes of society, that don't understand who they are, these people who lost what they felt was a most important part of themselves and are struggling to find it again. So I think it's pretty clear. I enjoyed the story a lot. I thought the characters were great. I thought the world building was really effective. Now, he does go into contemporary politics. He even mentions certain politicians by name, and he isn't afraid to be very explicit about his own political views and the characters' political views. The characters have different political views in some regards. So if you are looking for a pure escapism, it's not going to be here. If you read for the purpose of getting away from the real world, he isn't really going to let you do that. So you should know that going in. It doesn't overwhelm the story, but it's definitely here. But I appreciated that. I thought the world building worked really well. And also, those references to politics gave you insight about different characters' identities and who they became and how they became who they are. So it's useful in that way. It doesn't feel superfluous. It feels like it is serving a point. But the world building, so I thought that was good. The story itself, I really appreciate. I think it is really tender and emotional and gripping and bloody and gruesome and, on occasion, really terrifying. There isn't a lot of like jump scare type terror, though there is some of that. It's more an emotional terror. It's more of that fear that grips you deep and tells you you are nothing. Everything you think you know about yourself is a lie. All the good things you've ever done in your life are actually worthless. You don't deserve to be here. It's that kind of terror, that kind of emotional torment that I think many of us experience, especially as we look at all of our hopes and dreams that we had when we were in high school, and how few of those we may have realized by the time we reach middle age, when we feel like we've given up all of our opportunities. So that is the terror of this story, and I think he hits it beat for beat really well. Overall, I think he's tackling really heavy ideas. He's tackling ideas that are important to look at, right? He's giving you an opportunity to look at yourself through these broken characters. And now the traumas they experienced as kids may not be something that you've experienced, but I think all of us have some flavor of that, right? We definitely have a flavor of lost innocence, a flavor or an experience of intending something for our lives that we may not have had a chance to realize yet. And now we're at a point where we're looking at our lives and say, what about all these things I'd wanted to do that I haven't done? Does that mean I'm a failure, or is there still time to find myself? The teaser for this video, I said, is there a difference between a haunted house and a haunted home? And that difference, while it's hard to express in words, is something that I really feel in this story. A haunted home being much more emotionally devastating, right, than a haunted house. A haunted house is somewhere that anyone can go and they'll be equally terrified or not by whatever spooks have taken residence in this haunted house. A haunted home is your own tragedy, your own emotional turmoil that you have created. These are ghosts that you have created, either intentionally or unintentionally, that are holding you back, that are haunting your everyday life. And so with this story, what Wendig is doing is he's forcing the reader to ask themselves, is it ever possible to escape this haunted home that I have built around myself? So I think I'll end it there. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below about this story, if you've read it, about some of Chuck Wendig's other work, if you've read that. Like I said, I haven't read a lot of his other work yet. I'm really looking forward to. I'd also love to hear if you have any recommendations about other books that fit in this mold of looking at what it means to look back at your life and realize that you haven't lived up to your own dreams or expectations from yourself of childhood, that you've lost something, whether it be innocence or just that motivation to be more. And now that you're facing the back half of your life, you feel like you have given up on something. Are there any recommendations that fit into that mold? I'd love to hear your suggestions and your ideas down in the comments. But for now, I'll say thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.